And do I have a minute to, or I need to first make a motion that we proceed. We suspend the rules requiring us to vote and appear live. Do I have a second?
Second.
I second it.
Okay. All in favor? Aye.
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 Very good. Anyone opposed? Okay, very good. Then I'm also looking to entertain a motion to accept the minutes from the last meeting.
So move.
Second.
Motion is second. All in favor, please let it be known by saying aye.
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 Opposed, like sign. Okay, very good. Before we move into legislation, I'm going to ask Mr. Stevens and Ms. Goodrich if they could please present for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairperson Freeman. I'm going to go ahead and have Glenn Stevens start off speaking to the committee on kind of a little bit about what he has done with the city over the years, as well as our procurement report that was circulated to you all. And then I will touch on some points and then we can move into legislation. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Shelley. Chairman Freeman, it's a pleasure to present to you all this afternoon some work that we have been diligently working on over the past 9 months. I thought I would start off by presenting an overview, a little bit of the history of how we ended up at this point. Back in terms of economic inclusion, in terms of the timeline, back in 2015, the administration pushed for local residents to be involved in the workforce. And also at that time, they advocated for a goal-based inclusion program to increase the Akron residents and Akron businesses involvement in what at that particular time was considered the AWR CSO program, which I'm sure everyone's familiar with. The service director established at that time a 15% economic inclusion goal. Please note that the goal that was established for the AWR CSO program was different from the goals that are typically established for federally funded programs. The federally funded programs are usually DBE goals, disadvantaged business goals. At that time, the inclusion and certified payroll tracking system was introduced to the city of Akron. Those two systems were both the B2G Now and the LCP Tracker. And when they were introduced to the city, the software were brought forth to help track the participation that was established, that 15% goal, and both on the economic inclusion side, the B2G Now, and then the workforce side, the LCP Tracker. We continued along the path in 2015, 2016, and 2017. The AWR economic goal was split. It's worth noting that it was split between what was considered minority business, women-owned business, enterprise. That was split into what is now called minority business, disadvantaged business, veteran-owned business, and then the women's business enterprise goal was separated. So the goal was increased in totality to 18%, 18% for the MBE veteran, and then 3% for the women-owned businesses. That was in 2017. In 2018, 2019, let me make a point. The non-AWR projects during that 2017 period were also included into the tracking system. But it was very difficult to achieve some of the goals. We were working hard at it, but we were having a difficult time. In 2018, 2019, in connection with the Elevate Akron report, we were asked by then the service director to evaluate the inclusion program. We found that the city of Akron was not administering the program uniformly. That was a problem for the administration. But we did work with the engineering and law department to develop a policy And the policy primarily was based off of the ODOT Disadvantaged Business Program. They had a lot of good material, good practices that they had in place. And so we, modeled the City of Akron's policy off of that. In 2019, Mayor Horgan asked a number of staff and others to review the inclusion policy and to develop some recommendations with respect to the next steps that the city should take in terms of the economic inclusion. In the fall of 2019, party assembled a team, including Shelley Goodrich, which I must say that I have had the honor and privilege of working with closely with for the last 9 months. But we were assembled to take a deeper dive at looking at economic inclusion. And then another part of the goal was to look at procurement. So Shelley and I were joined together, my work in the past for the city with respect to economic inclusion, along with Shelley leading the charge with her staff, looking at procurement. And taking a deep dive, we started reviewing other cities. We looked at programs throughout the United States, over in Baltimore and Atlanta, Nashville, Michigan, and certainly Ohio. We finally settled on taking a deep dive look at programs in 3 communities, basically 2 municipalities and 1 authority. They included Dayton, Grand Rapids, and the Northeastern Ohio Regional Sewer District. Shelley and I spent a tremendous amount of time in late December, January, and early February on the road, talking to these various departments, trying to understand their programs to try to determine the best practices that they were implementing. So that way we could bring a good report back to the mayor. The 2020, when we were combined, both procurement and economic inclusion committee, we developed the report that was presented by the mayor's office, and it revealed the city needed to make some changes to better align with the best practices, both on the procurement side as well as the economic inclusion. And we learned that there were some tools that are available to municipalities that the city at that particular time wasn't taking advantage of. What are the key takeaways? In my opinion, the key takeaways were that 1, the city needs to do, especially with respect to economic inclusion, more training at the executive and administrative level. Council, I believe that you all need to understand better what economic inclusion means, and what measurables should we have in place that you all should be looking at. As well as it was clear that City of Akron, the various departments that purchase goods and services, they need training. And I think you will hear more of that from Shelley here shortly. It was also, another takeaway for us was also related to every one of the communities. They either had a designated person or a department that was responsible for economic inclusion, just like purchasing. In some cases, these individuals resided within the purchasing department. But what we learned with respect to economic inclusion is that you need a person or a department that owns this. This becomes their baby, and they are willing to, put forth the effort with respect to bringing about better economic, having more inclusive programs for all. Another takeaway was, again, the best practices. We learned of a program, the program on, help me out, GAR, which is the
Government Alliance on Race and Equity.
Government Alliance on Race and Equity. That's a national program that a number of municipalities have taken advantage of. It appears to be a very affordable program, but it's a group that collects data on race and equality, and they provide information to municipalities specifically on various techniques, approaches to race and equity within municipalities. And we found it to be very interesting and informative with respect to the type of information that cities have available to them through this program. Another takeaway was the need to strengthen, having a program to strengthen the capacity of your minorities, women-owned businesses within the community. And I will speak to that shortly. But that was a takeaway for us. And then the two other takeaways for me, one was the increased opportunity. When you talk about equity and inclusion, firms, they need opportunities. And so we feel that the city really needs to focus on how we increase the number of opportunities to this specific group of individuals who have traditionally been overlooked. And she will speak to that because it ties into purchasing. This whole presentation that I'm doing on inclusion is tied to purchasing. And then finally, another takeaway for me was the quarterly report, the need to have a quarterly report reporting to the administration, reporting to council, accountability. At the end of the day, everyone needs to be held accountable. And that's what we learned when we were out talking with these various committees. Some of them report out monthly, others report out quarterly, but all of them report. And it's about transparency. I'm pleased to report that under the mayor's leadership, the city is making some progress on the economic and inclusion front through this pandemic. I mean, you know, the mayor made his had the State of the City address in February, and then, as we all know, we immediately went into a shutdown. But we have still been meeting. We have still been working on various programs and various initiatives, trying to move the equity needle forward. The following items have been accomplished. In conjunction with the Summit County, a joint loan and training program was launched last month to assist minority women-owned businesses as well as the LGBTQ community and helping them navigate. This program will help them navigate the uncertain times and prepare them for hopefully future growth post-COVID-19. The MCAP program, as it's called, will have some of the following elements. The following elements will include the loan, a low interest loan program, bonding. Hopefully the bonding program will be a part of this. Supportive services. What we found in terms of our research that's in this report is that a number of the firms, they need kind of wraparound services, things like marketing support, legal support. Some of them need estimating and training. So the supportive services will be key. In addition to these services, one of the other things that we've done is that the local businesses must be willing to, and this was a part of the development of the MCAP program, they must be willing to accept the guidelines as established by the MCAP program in terms of being registered to participate in the program, being willing to attend the meetings, the trainings, so that they are available to capitalize on some of the loan programs and the bonding programs. They need to have full participation in order to really stand a chance of being successful. And then finally, one of the other things that is now in place post the mayor's announcement at the State of the City is the roundtable discussion. One of the things that I advocated is we need to, test the pulse. From time to time, you need to test the pulse of the people that you're trying to serve. So the mayor will hold his first roundtable discussion on July 1st with several of the contractors and subcontractors from our community. And this is just to have an honest discussion about the mayor's vision, opportunities that the firms are looking for, and where we as a community would like to see progress made. The Akron Urban League was selected to be the responsible party at this particular time to kind of stand up the programs. They have a history with working with the minority and women-owned community, the programs that I just touched on. And so the administration and the county, they have asked the Urban League work in that regard. In addition to the Urban League working to stand up some of the supportive services, Western Reserve funding the finance agency will be the responsible party for the loan and bonding element of the program. So they will, DEFA, Western Reserve is a subsidiary of DEFA. They will be responsible for the loan and bonding elements. The mayor has taken this serious, in my opinion, and he is committed to continue to identify ways to make his vision more than just a vision, but a reality. That's the economic and inclusion piece. Just a quick overview. Shelley, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay. Wonderful. Well, that's a hard act to follow, but I just want to touch on some other things briefly that Glenn discussed. But most importantly, the mayor tasked us with taking a look at how we can improve internally with our purchasing and engineering division and increase inclusion and diversity in our vendor pool. We also needed to deeply analyze where our current numbers were. So as you saw in the report, we had an economist for the city of Akron do a deep dive into our spend and was able to determine, that 5% of our spend went to minority-owned businesses. Those were all primarily through the engineering bureau. So I am working with the purchasing department on how we can increase our spend with diverse businesses on purchasing contracts and goods, as the smaller contracts that the city purchases do flow through the purchasing department. The report that you guys have before you was quite lengthy. It was 60 pages. That was even after many edits. I know it's probably a hard read, but we wanted to fully encapsulate, the barriers that the city of Akron currently has in place and how we intend to and recommend to fix those and why our numbers are so low. So we took a dive and we looked at other municipalities. We looked at the Northeast Ohio Regional Sewer District. We looked at them and they have full departments that are dedicated to diversity and inclusion and increasing diverse businesses and their ability to contract with those agencies. So we really did take a look at all of that. We were able to identify that we need to modernize some of our competitive bidding processes, and that is going to include some charter revisions as well as ordinance revisions, which will be coming before council in the coming months. So those are in progress. We also needed to understand kind of what our purchasing department, where their current, bad spots were and how we can correct those. And we are digging into that department and making those changes. But we mostly want to recruit and hire a diversity and inclusion director that is going to own this. Like Glenn said, they are going to work to match make businesses with the city of Akron, which is something we currently do not have. And they're going to assist these businesses and empower them to be able to compete on the city's jobs. Also, just want to thank council. Last month, in April, you guys passed Workday. We are in the middle of implementing Workday, and part of our recommendation was there was a lack of technology with these departments and being able to have vendors register online, be notified of opportunities. So we are evening that playing field through our technology and through the implementation of Workday. And then we are in the process of joining the Government Alliance on Race Equity so that they can provide us resources on how we can advance racial equity in our contracting and procurement, as well as to develop a racial equity action plan for the city of Akron. So these are all things that are moving parts that we are currently still working on, even though we're coming out of this pandemic. So we are happy to take any questions that any committee or council members may have at this time.
Very good. Thank you. I mean, I'm glad we're where we're at in this this time in history. And I know there's been a lot of work going in here the past few years. To be honest, I did not make it entirely through the
It's a lot.
60-page document, but some very encouraging thing about some proactive steps that are being taken. And let me first open up to any questions that we might have from committee members. And you just kind of give me a verbal raise of the hands. And yes, Councilman Malik.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Ms. Goodrich and Mr. Stevens. Thank you so much for this presentation, for the report. You know, I think sometimes, you know, there's a concern about asking difficult questions because we don't necessarily know what the answers are going to be. And this really stands as an example of really unpacking at a very detailed level what the system is and what the realities are, and how we can not just to do that, but to really figure out how we can make it better. And I really appreciate that. You guys covered so much, but I guess the only question I would have is, you know, is there some way of, you know, having data online in a sort of easily viewable and identifiable way going forward on what our contract breakdowns and whether we're meeting benchmarks, just so folks can easily see this going forward as we're trying to hit those benchmarks?
That is the goal. I mean, ultimately, you know, we are going through a pandemic right now. We are trying to make a lot of changes, and staffing, you know, it's already stretched pretty thin. But the person that we hope to recruit to come on board is fully going to own this, and they're going to be responsible for reporting out those metrics to the administration and to city council. So as I can't speak, we would like to have that person on board by the end of the year. Obviously, this pandemic has kind of thrown a wrench in our plans because it's difficult to recruit and hopefully woo someone to come live here right now and interview and go through the recruiting process during the middle, you know, of a shutdown. But we would hope to have that person on board by the end of this year. And then that is going to be something that they are tasked with. And ultimately, when we look at our ordinances, and Glenn and I kind of looked at other municipalities that have more goals, even in purchasing and contracting. So that may be part of the ordinances that come to council in regards to, you know, certain benchmarks that departments need to try and hit. Just not the engineering department, all departments. So that's definitely something that we're looking at instituting, and then being able to track metrics on. Because one of the things was when we started this process, we had no idea where our spend was and what the percentage was. So that is definitely, for us to be able to track our progress, we definitely need to be able to report on that. And so that will be something we're working on developing.
Thank you.
Mr. Swirsky.
Well, just you mentioned several times a diversity coordinator or department, and now this is different than what you just talked about. Someone you
No, this would be that person. So this person would kind of be responsible for doing outreach and education. Kind of, we went to the city of Grand Rapids, and they have a similar individual that works there who deemed himself a matchmaker with businesses. He would reach out to the businesses. A lot of our businesses are very, they don't want to bid on our jobs. They don't think they're going to get it. The paperwork is overwhelming. They don't know everything that they have to do. And this person would really be the link between the city and allowing them to bid on these jobs. So helping them with the paperwork, providing them resources, and also then reporting out metrics of you know, how many of these individuals are getting the jobs that they're bidding on. And then also we have a local preference in our ordinance. So currently we give 2.5% preference, which wasn't kind of uniformly being applied. And when I started digging into this, but looking at, should we give preference points for minority owned businesses, women owned businesses, disadvantaged businesses, small businesses within the city of Akron, so they kind of can get an upper hand in being able to compete on some of these jobs with the city of Akron. So that will kind of be what we're looking at when we bring ordinance revisions to you in regards to the procurement process.
I'm hoping that you're giving us a very conservative estimate in terms of when you could bring this person on board. And I would urge you to try, even though there is a virus and all the obstacles that creates, to try to make this happen as soon as possible. Secondly, on the report, because it is 60 pages, because it is, well, I don't say more than that, it would be good if there's some sort, keeping in mind the public's interest in this, some sort of executive summary that is shared on Facebook, that in a variety of ways, that the citizens who pay all of our taxes, who probably want more racial equity to happen, see the same things that we're kind of, who are really up close to the situation, know about. But I would hope that as soon as possible, that this report be presented succinctly to the public.
Yes, absolutely. I can talk to our communications team about that. We are being conservative, and hopefully I would love to have this person on board ASAP so we could continue all of the great traction that Glenn and I started. But we want to find the right person. I don't want to overpromise as to when, that may happen.
Yeah, I mean, you could also consider a provisional person or somebody already on staff who, in some ways, I don't know if there's somebody already doing somebody that's their job, at least temporarily, until we find a full-time person who could do this in a more comprehensive way. That might be one way. I know other agencies operate that way. They hire somebody provisionally, or they put someone temporarily in that position. That might be a good possibility. Just please consider that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair. Councilman Mike Freeman.
Ms. Amobian, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much for recognizing me. Thanks very much for the information. I think for me, the critical piece is, I don't know who's been a part of this team that you reference. And in addition to talking about minority and women, I think it's critical that we break out African Americans, because that, to me, is what Elevate Akron has been all about. And that's what I hear more than anything. I know we use the word minority to be inclusive of all kinds of groups, but I think we have to specifically talk about the impact that this will have, hopefully, on African Americans. And it's critical, as one of the council members just indicated, that we try to get this out to the public so that people can understand where we're starting from, what we are doing to make sure that we are addressing the various areas. I think it's important that we know where we are, and it sounds like we've done some digging to find that out. And then to talk about where we want to go, and so that people can trust the template that we're using to move forward. I agree with you. It's important for that person to be the right person, and hopefully have the authority to do the job that's necessary. So I certainly support that. I think the groundwork is important, and you've done some, but I think it's important to get what you have learned out to the public so that you can get feedback from people, particularly those individuals who continually talk about not having the opportunity to participate and work through the city. It'd be helpful just to have some type of town hall. And I know with this pandemic, how do you have it? I would imagine you do what the mayor has been doing, having virtual town hall meetings, but getting the message out in such a way that people who are interested can participate, because I think it's critical that people understand this is where we're starting from. And I hear that you've visited different cities and you have a method, at least department, because I heard you talk about ODOT disadvantage program and using some of their policies that they have in place. And I know that most of you have heard us talk about REAL, which is race, equity, and leadership through National Legal City. They have gone all around the country just doing some excellent training around all of this work. So, and I'm not saying that's the only place to go, but I know that a lot of people, a lot of municipalities have utilized them for trainings, and they seem to be excellent. I know I participated in several. I know that Councilman Neal has participated in some, and I think Councilwoman Samples has also participated in some of the trainings. But again, that's one of many. But I think it's important for us to understand, and I do appreciate the 60-page document that I'm going to try to dive through. But here's the problem, is that I think people need to know we are serious about what we're doing, and here's where we're starting from. And have you already drafted the job description and you have it somewhere advertised, or you're still working on it?
No, not yet. We're working with the Human Resources Department. We were trying to look at positions that are very similar in other municipalities, what the job requirements are for those. This is a new position at the City of Akron that we're creating. So we have to make sure that we're writing the job description to fully encompass everything that we want this person to do. And, and because it's not a position that's already in creation, there is a little more groundwork that we have to do. So that is in process. We hope to, get that posted and publicized here, very quickly now that we're coming out of this pandemic. But, it obviously has been a struggle just to get some stuff done, during when we had some, employees that were working remotely. So
I can tell you that I participated in a panel discussion. It was a luncheon where they had 3 different chief equity and diversity officers from 3 major cities. And I can certainly give you their info.
that would be wonderful. Yeah. I mean, as much information, I love researching, and I would love to make sure that we are fully encompassing in this job description and finding the right person for everything that we're looking to do. So if I could pick their brain, that would be fantastic.
Sure. We'll send that to you.
Okay.
Well, thank you very much for the information.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I'm watching for hands here. Mr. Swirsky.
I just want to thank you for your professionalism and your sense of urgency. And also, it seems like at least your willingness to wear more than one hat when necessary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you.
All right. Any other comments I would just, I just hope that we're really clear in our message that this is not something that we started 2 months ago, and that we are not reacting to, what's happened just in the past month or so, but that Akron, we've been forward thinking in this somewhat. We're in, the seminal stage, but that this is something that we've been looking towards. I think timing wise, I think it's a great time for us to say, this was already on our radar. This is already a conversation we've been having, and just really thank you for all your work.
No
Any other
problem.
questions or comments?
I just have a comment, Mr. Chair.
Yes,
I
ma'am.
think it is just coincidental that it happened with this terrible situation that's happened recently with the law enforcement stuff. But I think Elevate Akron tells us very clearly that this is something that we needed to pay attention to a long time ago, and that we have been talking about. So it's good to know that we are finally really putting some meat on the bone and trying to do some work to get to the public.
Yeah, and I can say we wanted to do our research and be very methodical in our recommendations, which is why it did take, a couple months. We went, like we said, we went to Grand Rapids for the day and met with them before, COVID happened. We really wanted to do a very deep dive and make sure that everything that we were recommending was supported, in fact and in law. and that we had all of our ducks in a row. So, it did take us quite a bit of time, and the timings, we had planned to have this out in March, but obviously COVID happened. So, there was a little delay, but we are still moving full steam ahead. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Fusco.
Yeah, just briefly, I want to thank you, as everyone else has, in terms of all the work and moving forward on this. Especially just wanted to thank Mr. Stevens, a businessman, a business leader, and a true leader in all of Akron for years and years. Glenn Stevens has done a great job in terms of moving Akron forward, and appreciate all your effort on this. You've done a great job. Thank you.
Welcome. It's a labor of love.
Yeah. All right. Any other comments or questions? Thank you so much, Glenn, Shelley. Thank you so very, very much. And we look forward to seeing this this masterpiece unfold as the days come ahead and affect people's lives. Thank you very much.
Welcome.
We're going to move into legislation now. We have 4 pieces of legislation. Our first piece is a resolution authorizing the city of Akron to receive funds from the county coronavirus relief distribution fund pursuant to House Bill 481 to be expended to cover costs consistent with the requirements of Section 5001 of the CARES Act, and directing and authorizing the Director of Finance to take all necessary actions to comply with House Bill 481 and declaring an emergency. And who we have speaking on this for us, please?
That'll be me, Steve Fricker, Director of Finance. So as Mr. Freeman read in, this piece of legislation authorizes us to accept CARES Act funding that will be distributed through Summit County. And I actually have a little bit of a presentation on this that I will bring up here. Whoops, maybe not. Host participant.
Steve, go ahead and try again. I enabled it.
Okay. Here we go.
There we go. Thank you.
Can everyone see that?
We're good here.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, so as I mentioned, this is to this resolution, which is required by the county for us to accept this CARES Act funding, will authorize us to accept the grant. And there's 2 separate pots of CARES Act money that will be available through the county. This piece of legislation is dealing with the first one, which is the funding made available by House Bill 481 that the state just passed last week. There will be another allocation of funds from the county that is a distribution of funds that were directed directly to Summit County, which they are then sharing with the communities within Summit County. So from each one of these 2 sources of CARES Act funding, Akron will receive roughly $8 million, so $16 million in total of this funding. It's
How much in total?
$16 million.
Okay, so make sure. Okay.
Yeah. So it's being distributed to the cities within Summit County according to the local government funding formula that has been used for several years. So Akron will receive 31.5% of these distributions of these 2 sources of money. And then there will be some additional distributions in the fall that will be distributed with a little bit of a different formula that will be distributed based on population. So, which is roughly the same as the local government, but because the local government funding formula is a little bit older, it's likely that we'll get a little bit of a higher percentage in this initial distribution than we will when we get the second distribution this fall. Okay. The use of these funds, so the county is setting this up as what they call a payroll support grant program. which means that they have determined through talks with the state auditor's office that the labor costs from our safety forces are eligible costs. So they are setting this up for all the communities within the county, that each city or township will submit their safety related payroll costs back to the beginning of March. And those would be eligible costs under this funding. So what will happen is that we will end up setting up a fund within our accounting system that we will deposit these dollars into, and then we'll be able to transfer some of those payroll costs over to this fund and have them come off our general fund and our EMS fund, which have, endured some revenue losses for the beginning of this year due to COVID. So this money covers both the cost of labor and benefits. Now, there's one additional thing that the city must actually retain. We can only spend 90% of it this year because the county is requiring us to hold a retainage amount of 10% of the funds in case there were any audit findings. So this, like all money that we get, this will go through our normal audit process, and they will look at this money to make sure it's spent in accordance with the CARES Act provisions that we must abide by. So the county is requiring all the cities to withhold 10% of this in case there's any audit findings. But as long as we spend it on, what has been vetted to be allowable costs, which are the safety related expenditures, we shouldn't have any audit findings. And then finally, so this is the first of several pieces of legislation. We'll have a second one today, which will establish, we are required to establish a fund as I mentioned earlier, as part of the county grant program, establish a fund to document the receipt and expense of these funds. So we will be setting up a fund called the Local Corona Relief Fund. And there will be a separate piece of legislation that council authorizes to establish that fund. And then, as I mentioned, there's a second source of funding. So the money that the county got direct will also be distributed. So we will also be doing an ordinance to accept that money and to establish that fund. We will also be bringing legislation when the time is right to amend our budget, because we have to appropriate for this fund just like we do all the others. So we'll have to bring an appropriation piece in to appropriate monies for this fund. Okay, that's all I have. I actually have, after this, I have a little bit of a presentation on just the financial impact of COVID and kind of where we are financially. But if there's any questions on the CARES Act funding, I'd be happy to take those.
I have a question.
Steve. Oh, okay, go right ahead, Mr. Mobian.
Yeah, my question, you kept saying safety. Are you talking about safety forces like police, fire, those groups, or just safety in terms of any staffing that we had to use?
Like first responders, so yes.
First responders?
Yes.
So all of this money can only be used towards the first responders?
That is correct. That's the way that the county is setting this up, which makes the accounting for it easier. So that's what they are establishing for all the cities within the county, is that we would submit those labor costs from first responders as eligible expenses to be reimbursed by this CARES Act funding.
Yeah, I can imagine, just a follow-up, Mr. Chair, I can imagine that this pandemic has had some impact on our finances in terms of the taxes we've been able to anticipate and collect. So you are going to share that with
I will, yeah. So I have a little presentation right after this where I'll share kind of where we are with a number of our different revenue sources and then with our expenses as well.
So we're pretty much not getting any extra money. This money is just going to fill some of the gaps that we are experiencing, I'm assuming.
That is correct.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Hey, Steve, if you want to unshare your screen there, I can get a look at everyone.
Okay. There we go.
There we go. Okay. Any other questions or comments? Yes, Mr. Malik.
Sorry about that. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Crooker, just to going off Council Person Amobian's point. So the amounts that previously were, going to be spent out of general fund that will now be spent out of this new fund. Is it imagined that where will that general fund money go, or will that entirety of that just be losses of the general fund that we don't have because of income tax?
Correct. It will be so that it will be expenses that will not have to be incurred by the general fund of our
Sure.
existing labor costs that will be incurred by this Corona local relief fund that we set up.
And I guess, is the gap that we're facing in general fund larger than the amount we're getting, or not?
That's difficult to say at this point. The one thing I would point out is, and I'll go through our finances here in a minute, but we are anticipating the revenue impact from this COVID situation to go well into next year. So, while this money, and it's hard to say at this point, while it might be sufficient to get us through 2020, we will have additional, financial challenges in 2021 that we'll also have to address.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes, Mr. Swirsky?
Yeah, so does this money carry, it's a huge sum of money. Does it carry with it restrictions, legal restrictions that would not allow us to be a little more flexible? The times have changed. Since that would provide opportunity for the city council to have some input into how the money is spent.
So there's a very limited scope of expenses that are qualifying for this. So the county's portion, they are mandating that we use it for this payroll support program that they are allowing. The CARES Act funding in general can only be used for direct COVID-related expenses that were not otherwise budgeted, that were not budgeted. That arose in a direct relation to the COVID virus. So, it's been determined that these safety force labor costs are eligible expenses, and that's why the county set the program up the way it did.
Okay, you use the word mandated.
Yeah, so the county, that's the way they are operating the grant portion. Their portion of the funding is that's what we are required to use that money for.
Thank you.
Other questions, Mr. Malik?
Sorry, that just raised the question, is the state, the part that comes from the state from HB 481, is that also subject to the same guidelines as the county? Sorry if I missed that.
Will be submitted with the same guidelines, yes.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Ms. Mobian.
Yeah. All of these dollars are coming from the federal government. Is that correct?
That is correct. They have been dispersed by the federal government. So the state got a portion, and the larger counties within Ohio, so Cuyahoga, Franklin, Hamilton, Summit, and I think Lucas all got, because they were larger than 500,000 people, they got a direct distribution of federal funds.
Okay.
Well, let me ask you this. Is there a reason why the county is dictating to us how we should use these dollars?
Because in some respects, they are responsible, since they're dispersing them to us. They have some responsibility for making sure that they are used in accordance with the CARES Act provisions. So that is why, yes, that's why they have an interest in making sure that the funding is used in accordance with the guidelines of the CARES Act program.
But those counties that got their funds directly, are they restricted as we are?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. I mean, those cities that got theirs directly, like
So
Cleveland.
the only city that actually got a direct allocation was Columbus, because you had to be over 500,000 people.
Okay.
Okay, I see. Thank you.
Other questions or comments? Steve, what would be your pleasure on this? We want to pass this tonight?
Yes, yes. So let me explain a little bit about the timing of this and why we are bringing this so quickly. So we just had our call with the county last Friday where they laid out, how the entire program will work. They have a 7-day window from the day they get the money to distribute it. So they need every city within the county to have their resolution passed by the time they get that money or within 7 days. So it's my understanding that many of these cities within the county will have to have a special council meeting, to get their resolution passed, because you can't accept the funds without having a resolution in place. So because we were able to, we knew we had this scheduled meeting today, we decided to go ahead and put this in today and are asking for its passage.
Okay, very good. So, if
Mr.
there's
Chair,
no question,
Mr.
do I
Chair,
have a motion?
I'll move it with emergency passage with suspension of the rules. Favorable report with suspension of the rules.
Okay, we have a motion.
Second.
We have a second. All in favor, let it be known by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, very good. Thank you, Steve. We'll get that passed out this evening. Our next item is an ordinance ratifying and authorizing the existence of the local coronavirus relief fund pursuant to Governmental Accounting Standard Board Statement number 54 and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this is the fund that I mentioned with the previous piece that we will establish to record the receipt of those dollars and then the expense, the labor cost expense of those dollars. So GASB 54 requires that we bring this to set up a new fund that we have our council's approval. So we are submitting this piece of legislation to establish this fund.
Establishing another fund. We won't get in trouble with the state for having too many funds, will we?
That is correct.
Okay, very good. Questions or comments? Okay, I would be under the assumption that we would probably want to pass this out this evening as well.
Yes, we would appreciate suspension of the rules on this.
Okay, very good. Looking for a motion.
I move that we pass it with a favorable report and suspension of the rules.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, like sign. Very good. We'll pass that out this evening.
Okay. Then, Mr. Chairman, before we go into the next piece, I'd like to briefly go through my little update of our financial situation. I have a couple slides that just kind of show, our revenue impact from COVID, as well as where we are with our expenses right now. So.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Go right ahead.
Okay, so in terms of where we are kind of overall as a city with both our revenues and expenses, you can see that we are down in both revenues and expenses. So our revenues have been impacted by about $19 million so far. And accordingly, we have worked to reduce our expenses a little bit. So our expenses are down about $10 million. And that's in spite of actually having a larger debt service payment on our sewer system, so if it wasn't for that, they would actually, the difference between expenditures between last year and this is all through May, would be pretty similar to the reduction in the revenue amount that we've seen. Okay, so here's a look at some of our key revenue categories. So the biggest one, of course, is our local income tax. To date, we are down about almost 8%. We're down about 7.7%. And I'll get into a little bit more detail about our income tax because there's kind of some mixed messages about, the categories of tax that are down. There's some good news and some bad news, and I'll kind of get into that. But we've also seen a corresponding, a very similar drop in our JED tax. As you know, it's an income tax similar to Akron's tax. So both of those are seeing an impact from lower workforce participation due to COVID. A little bit of good news was, and this was it was billed prior to COVID really hitting, but our property tax actually came in with a very slight increase. So we didn't really see, because that was due in mid-February, we didn't really see a huge impact from our property tax collections due to this first half payment. Now we may see a bigger reduction in the second half that we get in August, but so far the first half collections came in, with a very slight increase. And then we have seen, obviously our hotel tax has taken a little bit of a hit. So there's about a 22% reduction in our hotel tax. Assessments, like our property tax, came in. There's a slight decrease, but basically flat from last year. So not a huge impact on our assessment revenue. The license and permit fees, that's a little bit of a timing thing. So those are basically flat. That increase is kind of due to a timing thing on our franchise fee that we get from our cable providers within the city. We got one extra payment versus what we had last year at this point. But that'll even out because we typically get 4 payments each year. So we're just 1 payment ahead in that category. And then a little bit of reduction in local government. The gas tax, while that shows an increase, if you remember, we had a large increase at the state level in the gas tax. So while it's an increase over last year, it's not quite to our budgeted level. So we have seen some impact in the gas tax. Even though it's still up, it's not what we budgeted because, as you remember, we got that large increase last year. And then there was about a 24% drop in our tag tax. So that's a pretty heavy impact. The casino revenues to this point, and we've only gotten two quarters of 2 of the 4 payments in this year. A little bit of a drop, but not a huge impact. I would expect to see a larger impact in that next payment that we get, which is going to be kind of timed with when the casinos were closed in Ohio. So we should see a drop in that revenue. Water and sewer and curb service down between 3.5% and 5%, basically. So we are seeing a little bit of an impact on our utility revenues. And then our court fees are down about 14%. As you know, the court has been, they've been processing civil cases, but a lot of the criminal cases haven't been processing. So there has been some impact on their revenue. Okay, here's a look at where we are with our expenses. So on the labor front, we have not really seen a reduction because we haven't really, the only labor changes that we've really made have been some minor, a minor number of positions from our part-time staff. We have not laid off any full-time staff or anything like that. We've had some of our part-time people that we typically hire for the summer. We've eliminated some of those positions. There's other places where we've reduced the number of positions. If we have operations that won't be functioning as they would during a typical year. Recreation is one area where we are bringing back recreation staff, but not in the numbers that we did last year. And then another huge area of part-time staff for us is our school crossing guards. And they were off for a period of time, due to the coronavirus. So we do have some cost reductions there. But where we have saved, some substantial money is in our current expenditures. So these are our contractual and supplies expenses. We spent about $10 million less than we did last year through that time. And you can see most of these other categories, the rentals and leases, our capital outlay, which is our construction projects, a lot of those costs are down. So overall, we spent about $10.6 million less than. Okay, this is a little bit of a look at in more detail of our income tax collections. So as you can see up on this top graph, and I'm kind of showing it in two different ways. I'm showing it by month, and then I'm showing it by the different revenue categories or the different tax categories. So as you can see, we got off to a very good start this year, which has helped minimize the, while it's substantial 7.7%, it's somewhat offset by the fact that we did get off to a pretty good start. But you can see that it did start picking up, the impact started picking up in April. And then we had a large reduction of 31% in May. Now, the primary reason for that, though, we think is because they've moved the tax filing deadline back from April 15th to July 15th. And if you see where we're actually seeing the biggest reduction, is it in our individual payments, and those are the people that are paying. These are primarily people that live in Akron and work in another city and owe that differential of tax. Like if they work in a 2% city, and they would owe that extra 0.5% to Akron. And then we're also seeing a large reduction in our net profit tax. Again, some of that is going to be due to the moving of the filing deadline. Some of it is due to businesses, that are expecting, a reduction in profits and therefore would not be making their quarterly estimated payments if they're not expecting to have profit. So we should see, continue to see reductions in those amounts throughout this year and next year. So, and that's kind of the final slide that I have. Oh, I'm sorry, this is another quick look at our withholding tax. So this is, in my mind, one piece of encouraging news is that we haven't seen a substantial drop. We're seeing, roughly 4 to 4.5% drop in our withholding tax. And that's the tax we collect from people that are working in Akron and have their taxes withheld by their employer. So, in April and May, we saw, 4 to 4.5% reduction. So a little bit less of a reduction than what a lot of people were predicting. So we are pleased to see that. But the one area of concern, and it's highlighted by this last slide, is that net profit tax. So, while it's a relatively small piece, it's about 9% of our total tax collection. If there's a big drop in that, that's going to be a several $million impact to the city of Akron, both this year and next year, if these companies are not, making profits and remitting that net profit tax. So that is a big area of concern that we have both this year and next year, is that will be a pretty big impact on our income tax collections. Okay, and with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. That's kind of the numbers I think we've all been holding our breath to see. And, if we can, are you looking at these numbers, week to week, month to month? How often do you?
We're looking at them, especially the tax numbers, really kind of month to month. So the big day, in fact, today is our big withholding day. So typically on the 15th of any month, we get a large remittance of tax. So today we got in about $9 million in tax. So, it usually takes a couple days for us to kind of, process all those receipts and do some reporting on them. But, in a couple days, we'll have a better picture of what the withholding picture in the month of May looked like. And just kind of see if, are we going to see a reduction in that 4 to 4.5% differential in tax for withholding, or, will it increase? So, that's the best data that we get in terms of what's happening out there in our labor force within the city of Akron, is that withholding data that we get once a month.
Okay. Hey, could we just go ahead and just establish now that every month, even if it's just it's nice, concise, like you gave it, if we could just see that every month in a committee meeting, and then that would be great, because these precarious times right now. So if we could do that whenever, give yourself a week or so to get the numbers together, before you would come to the Budget Finance Committee meeting. I think it'd just be good for all of us to have you speaking to us, as opposed to us just maybe looking at some chart without having questions in front of us.
Okay, yes, of course.
Okay. Mr. Swirsky.
I just want to make sure, so this monthly update that you provide to us so eloquently, we just want to make sure that it's shared with the public. Is this readily available on the city's website?
So the tax information is, yes. So the tax information, and then we also do a quarterly revenue and expense report that's kind of citywide. So similar information, and we publish that on our Open Books Online portion of the city's website.
Okay, like the presentation you just gave us is kind of easy to follow. It's very coherent, well done. Could this be made available to the public on our website or city's website?
We could.
That would be great because it's good. Thank you. Let's share it with the public. Yeah, on a monthly basis.
Okay.
Great.
Yeah, I mean, if, I don't know, we're doing Zoom meetings now, and I'm assuming these are recorded. Maybe check with President Somerville to see, if these recordings are available on our website. Any other questions or comments?
Yes, Mr. Chair. You were saying that you got some numbers, some funds in today, Mr. Fricker. What did you just show us in May?
Yeah, so basically what I'm talking about, the funds that we got in today are what the employers remit for the previous month of withholding. So basically what they withheld from employer paychecks in May gets remitted to us 2 weeks after the end of the month. So the numbers I showed you today are not reflective of that $9 million. And that $9 million is pretty typical. It might be a slight reduction as we've seen. It's hard to tell yet, because we don't always get all of it on the exact 15th. So, I wouldn't want to make a determination of what the withholding month looked like until we have a couple more days to look at that data.
Yep, but didn't you show us something in those graphs in May, April and May, where there were some reductions, 4.5%?
Right, yeah, so,
So what you received today?
It's what received. So we received in May, we received April's withholding.
Right, there's a month lag.
There's a month lag. So when he was showing you May's data, that was actually April's tax.
Okay, okay, I got you.
So we're always like a month behind.
Okay, thank you. That explains that. Let me ask you one more question. The 600 people that were laid off, furloughed, or whatever, are they shown? Is the impact of that shown in those numbers?
It would be shown in those numbers, although keep in mind that impact from a cost standpoint was very minimal, because the way we laid out that, the employees that were furloughed were allowed to continue to use their vacation and sick time. So unless they chose to forego a paycheck, there was really no reduction in our labor expenses for those employees. Now, a few of them chose to forego their paycheck and save their leave, but that was a pretty minimal amount. So for the most part, we really did not have labor savings in the form of salaries from our full-time employees.
So you didn't have people that went on unemployment out of that 600?
We had a few. I mean, it was pretty minimal. Yeah, most people chose to use their vacation and sick time and stay on the city's payroll.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Yes, Councilman Malik.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Picker, for that great update. Going off of Councilwoman Amobian's point, for furloughs, how many employees remain on furlough? Do we have that information?
We do not have any employees remaining on furlough.
Okay, and then in terms of employees, likely some of them ran up deficits in paid leave. Are we sort of thinking through how that's going to be?
We came up with basically a borrowing mechanism for employees to be able to borrow. I believe it was $110 20 hours of leave, so
Yeah.
those that chose to, if they ran out of leave during the furlough period, we allowed them to continue to get a paycheck and to essentially borrow that time against the future, where they can pay that back either in the form of a lower paycheck or to have their leave accumulation rate reduced, to kind of make up for that time.
Sure, thank you.
And one other thing I'll mention is that we pay all employees were subject to the Families First Coronavirus Relief Act. And so all full-time employees, if they were furloughed, were entitled to 80 hours of paid time. And then that was kind of prorated if you were a part-time employee. They were subject to that too, up to the amount of hours, in a week that they worked. So, so some of that time was actually paid without them having to take vacation or sick time.
So wasn't it 2/3 though? You got 2/3 from that program, and then you had to do that.
I believe that it wasn't 2/3. The 2/3 was if you were using Family and Medical Leave Act provisions, that was paid at 2/3. I think the Families First Coronavirus Relief Act was paid at 100%.
Okay, I haven't looked into that. Okay.
Any other questions or comments? Yes, Mr. Fusco.
Thank you. On the expense side, and without having in front of me, I don't know if these are exact numbers, but there was like a $3 million increase for and I don't know exactly what that was, is like an expense to the state and to the county, I believe. Or the feds.
It was state and county charges.
Yeah. And that's, I'm just curious why that increase.
So that's a $316,000 charge. I'm going to guess that is the election expense, without looking at it. I know we basically get our county property tax distribution is given to us, and then they net out, they have a collection fee, and then they net out certain expenses that they have and one of which is the election expense.
Okay.
So
it appeared to be about 3 million or so.
It could also be a timing thing, without looking at the details. It really was. It was 316,000, so it wasn't a huge.
Oh, 316. Okay, thank you.
It's just 10.
Right.
Any other questions or comments? All right. All right. Let's see. Boy, we've gone on this one for a while. We're on number 4 now.
Yes, number 4.
Okay. All right. Sarah, did we vote on 3A?
I don't think so.
We
Okay.
did, yes.
Oh, we did.
Yeah.
Okay, very good. Okay, number 4 then. This would be an ordinance authorizing the mayor or his designee to enter into a contract or contracts with Cadenza for the purchase of infrastructure upgrades, including network switches and routers to the city's data network, and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this is for some upgrades to our city's our network infrastructure that we talked about during budget hearings and that we have as part of our capital budget. And this is especially timely now in the age of Corona, when we're relying on these network systems for people to be able to work at home. So we still have a number of employees that are working from home. At one point during the height when people were off, we had over 200 workers that were logging into the city's network from home and performing their jobs. So our IT department has been diligently working to keep this network up and running. We do have kind of an older network, so there are some problematic areas that we're looking to address. So we do have Bill Fatica on the line. If you guys have any specific questions about the type of infrastructure that we're putting in here. But this is kind of typical networking equipment that makes the connectivity within the city's network system work together.
Hey, Steve, on my piece of legislation, or no, okay, let me back up. You said Bill is on the line?
Yes, he is.
Okay. Bill, how the network held up pretty well during the whole pandemic?
Yeah, things held up pretty well. We did have a few little hiccups here and there, but overall, we had probably maybe close to 200 people connecting in, each day and able to work. So it did hold up pretty well. Like Steve had mentioned, we did notice a couple issues with some of our internet routers. That equipment is well over 8 years old and currently no longer supported. We saw some slowness there, but overall it held up pretty good.
Okay. Had you ever had that kind of strain on your system before?
Nope. That was probably the first.
Okay, good. What questions or comments? All right. Somebody help me out here. What would be the preference on this? We want to go consent, or is this something I want to pass out this evening?
Consent is fine on this piece.
Okay.
So it's been advised that we not use a consent agenda during special meetings.
Okay.
Because they are mentioned in our regular meeting rules, but nothing for special meetings.
Okay, very good.
In that case, I would ask for suspension of the rules then.
All right.
I move that we pass this with a favorable report and suspension of the rules.
Okay. We have a motion to second. All in favor, let it be known by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, very good. Let's see. Finally, we have an ordinance authorizing the purchasing agent or her designee to enter into a contract or contracts with Environments for Business LLC for the purchase of office furniture and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So along with the network upgrades, as we talked about during budget hearings, for the first time in a number of years, we had planned this year to hire some additional IT staff to address some very impressive needs that we have in our IT area. So we originally had planned to hire about 9 employees. We've scaled that back a little bit due to some of our revenue concerns, but we still do plan to go ahead and hire, at least this year, about 7 people. And with these additional people, we need some space for them to work. So this legislation provides for some additional workstations up on the 8th floor where these employees will be working and performing their jobs.
Questions or comments? All right. With that, I would be looking for a motion to suspend the rules.
Move that we accept this piece of legislation with favorable report and suspension of the rules.
I have a motion and a second from Mr. Malik. All those in favor, let it be known by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Very, very good. All right. Thank you so much. And if there is nothing else to come before us, we are adjourned. See everyone this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You.
Thank you.